The security guard held one hand across the entrance while the string quartet warmed up inside the glass house. "I am sorry, Miss Bennett," he said, looking from my 13-year-old daughter to the tablet in his hand. "Ruby Warren is not on the guest list." Behind him, sunlight flashed across hundreds of panes of old glass. Guests moved between white flowers and rows of polished chairs. My sister's wedding was supposed to begin in 40 minutes, and I was expected upstairs in the bridal room to fasten Cameron's dress and read the speech she had written for me. I looked at the guard again. "Ruby is the bride's niece. I know who she is." His voice softened. "I was given a photograph and specific instructions." Ruby's fingers tightened around mine. She wore the pale blue dress Cameron had chosen for her 3 months earlier. In the car, she had practiced how she would congratulate her aunt without sounding nervous. Now she stared at the open entrance, as if she could not understand how a place prepared for 200 people had no room for one child. Cameron appeared before I could call her. She came down the stone path in her wedding gown, followed by her coordinator, who kept glancing at the time. "What is this?" I asked. Cameron did not look at Ruby. "She knows what she did." Ruby swallowed. "I only told Phoebe she did not have to say something that was not true." Cameron's face changed for half a second. The bride disappeared, and I saw the 16-year-old girl I had once found sitting on our kitchen floor after our mother died, demanding to know who would choose her now. Then the polished smile returned. "Ruby made her choice," Cameron said. "She chose Phoebe's feelings over my wedding. Only real family members are allowed." 18 years earlier, I had left nursing school, worked mornings at a clinic, nights at a hotel, and weekends serving strangers at weddings, so Cameron would never have to wonder where she belonged. I had signed school forms, stretched groceries, and sat beside her through every nightmare. I had never once asked her to erase our mother, or prove she loved me more than anyone else. I smiled because if I did not, I might have said everything in front of the guests gathering behind us. "Have you forgotten?" I asked. Cameron's jaw tightened. "Do not turn today into another speech about everything you paid for and gave up." I was not talking about money. I took Ruby back to the car. She began apologizing before I closed the passenger door. "Mom, I am sorry. If I had kept quiet, you could still be inside." That sentence made the decision for me. Before I drove away, I sent Jonathan one message. "Before you marry my sister, ask Phoebe why Ruby was removed from the guest list." 30 minutes later, Cameron called me in tears. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed. "Jonathan took Phoebe and left. He canceled everything." I kept one hand on the steering wheel and looked at my daughter, who was wiping tears from her face with the edge of her sleeve. "I told him to ask his child one question," I said. "Whatever ended your wedding came from your answer." Cameron's breathing went ragged. "You chose someone else again," she whispered. "You always do." At the time, I thought my sister was talking about Ruby and the little girl she had tried to silence. 3 days later, my ex-husband called after months of keeping only the Sunday contact schedule he had recently begun rebuilding with Ruby. "Cameron asked me to lie for her again," Miles said. "Before I answer her, there is something you need to know about why our marriage ended." That was when I realized the wedding might not be the first time my sister had tried to decide who was allowed to remain in my family. Before I tell you how my sister came to believe my love belonged to her, I hope you are doing well today. Stay with me, and please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what happened next. 8 months before the wedding, Cameron called me on video while I was sorting patient intake reports at my kitchen table. She held her left hand close to the camera until a diamond filled the screen. "Jonathan proposed," she said, laughing so hard the image shook. "Hannah, I am getting married." I cried before she did. I had spent 18 years waiting to see my little sister reach a place that looked safe, permanent, and chosen. Jonathan was steady, kind, and already a devoted father to Phoebe. I wanted to believe Cameron's engagement meant the frightened girl I had raised had finally stopped expecting every good thing to disappear. Then her expression softened. "I want you beside me when I get dressed. Mom should be there, but she cannot be. So it has to be you. The words struck the oldest tender place in me. Our mother, Elaine, had collapsed in 2008 and died 2 days later after an emergency hospital stay. During one brief period of clarity before the final procedure, she had squeezed my hand and asked me not to let Cameron face what came next alone. She had not asked me to surrender my life. I was the one who turned that frightened request into a permanent promise. Our father had already built another household. He said there was no room there for a 16-year-old who was angry, grieving, and barely sleeping. He signed a notarized consent to guardianship, and after a hearing in Massachusetts Probate and Family Court, I became Cameron's legal guardian. I was 24 and halfway through my nursing program. Within a week, I withdrew from school. I worked mornings at a clinic reception desk, evenings at a hotel, and weekend banquets whenever the grocery money ran short. I did not think of it as heroic. Rent arrived every month whether anyone felt brave or not. Cameron used to wait awake for me on the kitchen floor, wrapped in our mother's old robe. The first question was always the same. "You are coming back, right?" Every night, I gave her the same answer. "I am not leaving you." I meant she would have a home while she finished growing up. Cameron heard something larger. She heard that no husband, child, or future would ever be allowed to take me away. Ruby came into the kitchen while Cameron was still talking about flowers and guest lists. At 13, my daughter tried to hide her excitement and failed completely. "Will I be in the family pictures?" she asked. "Of course," I told her. "Cameron is your aunt." Cameron smiled from the screen, but it arrived a second late. "We will figure out the photo schedule." A week later, she emailed me the speech she wanted me to read at the reception. According to Cameron's version, she had always been independent, had lifted herself from adversity, and had never allowed hardship to define her. There was no mention of our old apartment, the hearing, the tuition gaps, or the years when I slept 4 hours a night. When I asked whether I could add one memory about Mom, Cameron sighed. "Jonathan's family does not need a sad survival story on a happy day. I want them to see who I am now." I told myself that shame could make people protective of their past. I even paid the unexpected alteration charge on her wedding dress when she said her account was tight until payday. She promised to repay me, and I said it was fine before she finished the sentence. After the call, I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept old tax records and Ruby's school forms. Beneath them lay a faded information sheet from the nursing program I had left in 2008. I touched the folded edge, then covered it again. That evening, I returned to Cameron's speech. The final line read, "Cameron taught all of us how to build a family from nothing." I stared at it for a long time, because the person who had actually built our family from nothing was nowhere in the story. The following Saturday, Ruby and I drove to Jonathan's house with 2 empty storage boxes, a pack of photo labels, and the guest spreadsheet Cameron had already revised 3 times. Jonathan lived in a gray colonial on a quiet street outside Maplebrook. The house was comfortable without feeling staged. Muddy work boots sat beside the back door, rolled construction plans rested against the wall, and Phoebe's backpack lay beneath a framed photograph of her mother. Jonathan opened the door, with his phone pressed between his shoulder and ear. He finished giving instructions about a delayed concrete delivery, apologized for taking the call, and immediately asked Ruby whether she wanted hot chocolate. He looked tired, as if some part of him was always counting what still needed to be done. "I have been running this house alone for 4 years, he told me while we carried the boxes into the dining room. Cameron brought energy back into it. Phoebe needed that. I probably did too. He said it with gratitude, and I felt relieved. He seemed to love the certainty Cameron projected, the way she entered a room and decided where everything belonged. Phoebe came downstairs when Cameron called her. She was 12, slight and careful, with Laura's dark eyes and Jonathan's habit of pausing before he spoke. Cameron asked whether she was excited to help with the wedding video. Phoebe looked at her father before answering. "Yes," she said. "I think so." Jonathan smiled at her. and only then did her shoulders loosen. Cameron had spread hundreds of photographs across the dining table. She had arranged them into neat groups labeled Jonathan, Cameron, Phoebe, and Future. The last category held engagement pictures, family dinners, and carefully posed afternoons after she moved in. The video is called Becoming 3, Cameron explained. It will play just before I walk in. I want people to understand they are not only watching a marriage, they are watching a family become whole. She said whole, with the satisfaction of someone placing the final piece into a design. Jonathan nodded while checking a message from his project manager. Phoebe ran one finger along the edge of a photograph, but said nothing. Ruby sat beside her and began sorting pictures from a blue storage bin. The first few showed Phoebe as a toddler, then on a bicycle, then asleep against Laura's shoulder during what looked like a summer concert. In every photograph, Laura was smiling at her daughter rather than at the camera. "That one is beautiful," I said. Phoebe looked up quickly. Mom loved outdoor concerts. She said music sounded better when the sky could hear it. Before I could respond, Cameron lifted the photograph from Ruby's hand and placed it in a separate box near the window. "We already have enough early childhood pictures," she said. "The ceremony should focus on where we are going, not where everyone has been." Jonathan glanced at the box but did not challenge her. "Maybe one photograph of Laura should stay," he said. "For Phoebe." "Of course," Cameron replied. "I am not erasing anyone. I am only trying to keep the message hopeful." Phoebe lowered her eyes. Ruby watched her for a moment, then held up another picture of Laura standing beside an old record player. "What song did she like most?" Ruby asked. Phoebe's face changed. "Dream, a little dream of me." She sang it badly on purpose. Ruby laughed. "My mom sings every song badly without trying." "I heard that," I said. The two girls smiled, and within minutes they were talking quietly about music, school, and fathers who lived differently inside their lives. Ruby did not share every disappointment Miles had caused, but she told Phoebe that her father lived in another city and had missed enough visits that she no longer packed a bag until his car was actually outside. Phoebe said, "Sometimes adults promise things because they want to be the person who keeps the promise." Ruby nodded, as if the sentence made perfect sense to her. "Then the kid has to figure out whether the promise is real." Their calmness made the exchange hurt more. Cameron interrupted by asking me to review the transportation sheet. She wanted the shuttle from the hotel to leave 12 minutes earlier, wanted the elderly guests placed on the first vehicle, and wanted me stationed near the entrance with the final seating list. "You are the only person I trust to catch what everyone else misses," she said. It sounded like praise because Cameron had learned to wrap responsibility in affection. I opened the binder and saw the venue, catering and transportation contracts already signed by both Cameron and Jonathan. My name appeared only beside volunteer tasks and emergency contacts. I was not paying for the wedding or guaranteeing the vendors. I was simply doing what I had always done, making sure Cameron's life did not come apart at the edges. Jonathan sat across from me and studied the color-coded schedule. "Was she always like this?" he asked. "Needing every minute decided in advance?" Cameron was close enough to hear, but she kept sorting photographs. I smiled. "She had very little stability when she was young. Planning helps her feel safe." Jonathan nodded, accepting the explanation because I had given it the authority of an older sister. I saw Cameron's shoulders relax. That was one of the ways I protected her. I translated control into fear, cruelty into stress, and entitlement into an old wound. I had done it for so long that the translation came before the truth. A little later, Jonathan's sister called to ask what she should tell relatives about my role in the ceremony. I said I was Cameron's older sister and worked in patient intake at the community health center. Cameron looked up immediately. "Just say healthcare," she told me after the call ended. "Patient intake sounds administrative." "It is administrative. You supervise the department. You make it sound like you sit at a folding table answering phones." I almost reminded her that answering clinic phones had once paid for her winter coat. Instead, I said. Healthcare is fine. Cameron smiled as if we had solved a problem together. Near the bottom of the last box, Ruby found Cameron's high school graduation photograph. Cameron stood in a borrowed white dress with one arm around me. Behind us, the brick wall of our old apartment building showed a rusted fire escape and an air conditioner held in place with a strip of silver tape. Ruby grinned. Mom, you look exactly the same. I absolutely do not. Cameron took the photograph and turned it over. The background is ugly. Use the graduation portrait from school instead. That one has both of us, I said. The video is not about the apartment. Her voice remained pleasant, but the room felt smaller. Jonathan's family does not need every difficult detail. People are allowed to move forward. I told myself she was protecting the woman she had become. It was easier to believe she was ashamed of poverty than ashamed of me. By late afternoon, Jonathan left for dinner, and Ruby carried boxes to the garage. Phoebe began stacking the photographs of Laura back into the blue bin. Cameron watched until the last picture disappeared beneath the lid. Then she took a cream envelope from her bag and handed it to Phoebe. Her name was written across the front in careful gold letters. Beneath it, in smaller print, were the words, "Becoming 3. This is your part of the video," Cameron said. Practice it alone first. Your dad has enough to worry about, so we do not need to make him nervous before you are ready. Phoebe held the envelope with both hands. Can I change anything if it does not sound like me? Cameron touched her shoulder. Read it a few times before deciding that. Sometimes the right words feel unfamiliar because we have not grown into them yet. On the drive home, Ruby stared through the passenger window until Jonathan's street disappeared behind us. Phoebe looked like she was going to cry, she said. Weddings make everyone emotional. She did not look emotional. She looked scared. I kept my eyes on the road. Cameron wants the day to be perfect. She puts pressure on herself, and sometimes that pressure spills onto other people. Ruby was quiet for several miles. I heard Cameron's sentence again. The right words feel unfamiliar because we have not grown into them yet. I had spent years calling Cameron's pressure love because love was easier to forgive. That afternoon, for the first time, I wondered whether perfection was only the name she gave a story no one else was allowed to change. 3 days before the wedding, Ruby and I returned to Jonathan's house to help assemble the small gift bags Cameron wanted placed on every guest's chair. The dining table had disappeared beneath cream-colored boxes, ribbon spools, and packets of sugared almonds. Cameron had printed a diagram showing exactly where each item belonged. Ruby followed it carefully, while Phoebe tied ribbons beside her, but the girls spoke so quietly that I could barely hear them over the paper rustling beneath their hands. Cameron moved between rooms with her phone pressed to her ear, correcting place cards and confirming the rehearsal schedule. Jonathan was still at a construction site, trying to finish work early enough to join us for dinner. Before leaving the room to take another call, Cameron reminded Phoebe that they would rehearse the wedding video later. Phoebe's fingers stopped around a ribbon. Ruby noticed. Do you want to practice with me first? Cameron looked at Phoebe, waiting for her answer. Phoebe glanced toward the front window, as if Jonathan might already be walking up the path. Maybe. That is a good idea, Cameron said. Ruby can help you sound less nervous. She returned to her call, apparently satisfied that Ruby would make Phoebe more cooperative. She did not yet understand that my daughter cared more about whether words were true than whether they sounded polished. I carried 2 finished boxes into the kitchen. When I came back, the girls had moved to the far end of the table. Phoebe had taken the cream envelope from beneath a stack of programs and unfolded 3 pages. Do you want us to go somewhere else? I asked. Phoebe shook her head too quickly. It is fine. I continued working a few feet away, close enough that she knew an adult was present, but far enough to give her privacy. Phoebe read softly at first, stumbling whenever she reached a sentence Cameron had underlined. Before Cameron, Dad and I were only surviving, she read. We lived in a house full of memories, but without a real future. Today, Cameron gives us the chance to stop being 2 broken people and finally become a real family. Ruby looked up from the ribbon in her lap. Phoebe lowered the page. There is more. You do not have to read it to me, Ruby said. I am supposed to read it in front of everyone. Her next line thanked Cameron for teaching her that moving forward meant releasing the parts of the past that kept the family incomplete. The final paragraph said Laura would have wanted Phoebe to stop living inside grief and accept Cameron as the mother guiding her into the future. Phoebe's voice thinned until she could not continue. I felt the same unease that had followed me home after our last visit, but I told myself the wording could still be changed. Wedding speeches were edited all the time. Cameron might have written too dramatically without understanding what the sentences would feel like in Phoebe's mouth. Ruby did not criticize Cameron. She did not tell Phoebe to refuse. Instead, she asked, "What would you say if you were not worried about making anybody disappointed?" Phoebe folded the pages along the existing crease. Dad loves her. He has been happier since they met. That can be true, Ruby said. I want her to marry him. Phoebe looked at the photograph of Laura on the wall. But Mom and Dad and I were already a family. We were not broken people waiting for Cameron to fix us. Ruby nodded. Then maybe that is what you should say. Phoebe's eyes filled, though she blinked before the tears could fall. Cameron said Dad might cancel the wedding if I make him think I am not ready. She said he has already lost enough. The words struck me harder than the script. Phoebe had not simply been asked to welcome Cameron. She had been made responsible for protecting her father from another loss. I started to speak, but Ruby reached across the table first. My dad does not live with us, she said. He has missed birthdays and weekends. He said he would come. Sometimes I used to pretend I did not care because Mom already had enough to worry about. It did not make anything better. It only meant nobody knew what I was actually feeling. Phoebe studied her. Did your mom get upset when you told her? Sometimes she got sad. That is not the same as being mad at me. I looked down at the gift box in my hands. Ruby had learned that distinction through more pain than I wanted to admit. Phoebe opened the shared document on her tablet. Cameron had given her access so she could practice from the latest version. Ruby pulled her chair closer, but she did not touch the keyboard until Phoebe asked her to help. Together, they changed the opening. Phoebe wrote that, after her mother died, she and her father had learned how to carry grief without letting it stop their lives. She wrote that she was glad Jonathan had found someone he loved, and that she hoped their home could make room for new memories. Then she added the sentence that made her sit straighter as she read it aloud. I will always be Laura Brooks's daughter, and I do not need to erase my mother to welcome Cameron into our family. Ruby smiled. That sounds like you. Phoebe saved the document. I should show Dad. You should, Ruby said. Before the wedding. The kitchen door opened before Phoebe could answer. Cameron stepped back into the room, still holding her phone. Her eyes moved from the original pages to the tablet between the girls. What are you doing? Phoebe's face lost all color. We made it sound more like me. Cameron did not raise her voice. That would have been easier. She placed her phone on the table, opened the document on her own device, and studied the edit history. The silence stretched until even the ribbons seemed too bright. Phoebe, go upstairs, she said. Phoebe gathered the original pages. Can I show Dad the new one first? We will discuss it after you have calmed down. I am calm. Cameron looked at her with a smile that contained no warmth. Upstairs, please. Phoebe obeyed. Cameron then turned to Ruby. Your mother is in the kitchen. Get your things. You are going home. Ruby stood, but did not move toward me immediately. Phoebe did not do anything wrong. This is not your family, Ruby. She is my friend. You do not understand what the Brooks family needs. You have no right to come into this house and interfere with how they move forward. Ruby's voice shook when she answered. She only wanted to say the truth. Cameron picked up the printed script and aligned its edges against the table. Truth is not always loyalty. I did not hear that conversation myself. Ruby repeated it to me in the car, staring at her knees as though she were confessing to something shameful. Before we left Jonathan's house, Cameron pulled me aside near the front door. Ruby upset Phoebe, she said. She encouraged her to rewrite the video after Jonathan and I already approved it. Ruby, is that true? I asked. Ruby looked at me. Phoebe asked me to help. Cameron folded her arms. She planted the idea that Phoebe should be ashamed of welcoming me. I did not say that. Then apologize for crossing a boundary. Ruby's mouth tightened. I should have asked to see both versions. I should have asked Phoebe what she wanted. Instead, I saw the wedding 3 days away and reached for the quickest path back to peace. If you overstepped, apologize, I told Ruby. I am sorry I changed the document without asking you, she said to Cameron. Cameron accepted the apology without offering one of her own. On the drive home, Ruby told me the exact words Cameron had used. Truth is not always loyalty. I gripped the steering wheel and said Cameron was under pressure. Even as I defended her, the explanation sounded weaker than it had before. That night, Ruby sent Phoebe a message asking whether she had shown Jonathan the new script. No answer came. Jonathan had agreed that the children would place their phones in a labeled basket during an hour of rehearsal so everyone could concentrate. What I learned later was that when the hour ended, Cameron returned every device except Phoebe's. She said Phoebe needed more time without outside influence. Ruby received only one message before the phone went silent. I am sorry. She says I have to choose. Ruby showed it to me from the doorway of my bedroom. Choose between what? I do not know, I said. It was the truth, but I already knew enough to feel afraid of the answer. While I was reassuring Ruby, Cameron was sending Linden Glasshouse Security an updated guest list. She attached my daughter's photograph and instructed them not to let Ruby enter or approach Phoebe. I knew nothing about it. Cameron still texted me that evening, reminding me to arrive early so I could help fasten her dress and read the reception speech she had written for me. On the morning of the wedding, Ruby stood in my bedroom while I adjusted the straps of her pale blue dress. She looked at herself in the mirror, but did not smile. Mom, can a kid ruin a wedding just because she will not say what an adult wants her to say? No, I told her. A child telling the truth cannot ruin a healthy marriage. A few hours later, Cameron would force me to prove whether I actually believed that. Linden Glasshouse stood at the edge of an old apple orchard, its iron frame rising through the October trees like the skeleton of a cathedral. Sunlight poured through hundreds of glass panes and broke across the white flowers lining the entrance. Inside, the string quartet was testing the same 4 notes again and again while guests moved toward rows of polished wooden chairs. Ruby and I arrived 45 minutes before the ceremony. I carried the folder containing Cameron's reception speech, a small emergency sewing kit, and the earrings she had asked me to keep safe until the last moment. Ruby wore the pale blue dress Cameron had chosen for her in July. At the entrance, a security guard scanned my name and gave me a practice smile. Then he looked at Ruby, returned to the tablet, and stopped. I am sorry, Miss Bennett, he said. Ruby Warren is not on the guest list. I thought it was another mistake in Cameron's endless revisions. She is 13. She is attending with me. The guard turned the screen slightly, though not enough for me to read the names. You are cleared to enter. She is not. Ruby's hand slid into mine. Maybe she forgot to add me back. My daughter is the bride's niece, I told him. Please call the coordinator. His expression changed from professional distance to discomfort. I know who she is. I was given a photograph and specific instructions not to let her enter or approach Phoebe Brooks. He opened a file on the tablet. Ruby's school portrait appeared beside her full name. For several seconds, I could not make sense of what I was seeing. Cameron had not accidentally removed Ruby from a spreadsheet. She had made sure a stranger could identify my child on sight. A wedding coordinator hurried toward us from inside, lifting the hem of her black dress away from the gravel. She told the guard to keep the entrance clear and asked me to step aside because another shuttle was arriving. Hannah, Cameron needs you upstairs, she said. Hair and makeup are finished, but she will not put on the earrings until you get there. I looked at Ruby. My daughter is being denied entry. The coordinator lowered her voice. I was told transportation could take Ruby back to the hotel. You are still expected in the bridal room. That was when I understood the arrangement. Cameron had not rejected both of us. She had designed a test with only one acceptable answer. I was supposed to place Ruby in a car, walk through those doors alone, and spend the next hour acting as the mother of the bride. I was supposed to fasten Cameron's dress, place our mother's earrings in her ears, and read a speech about the family she claimed to have built from nothing. Ruby stared at the ground. Mom, you can go in. I can wait somewhere. The fact that she offered made my stomach turn. Before I could answer, Cameron appeared at the end of the stone path. Her gown was fitted through the waist and fell into a long ivory train that her coordinator gathered in both hands. Guests slowed as she approached, smiling at first because they assumed they were witnessing a tender family moment. Cameron stopped several feet from Ruby. What is this? I asked. She knows what she did. Ruby lifted her head. I helped Phoebe say what she actually wanted to say. You encouraged a grieving child to humiliate me on my wedding day. She was not trying to humiliate you. Cameron finally looked at her. You told her she did not have to choose me. I told her she did not have to pretend her mother made her family broken. The coordinator glanced toward the entrance. A few guests had begun pretending not to listen. Cameron's face became still. Phoebe and Jonathan are trying to move forward. You had no right to interfere. She asked for help, Ruby said. You made your choice. You chose Phoebe's feelings over my wedding. Ruby's fingers tightened around mine. I felt the slight tremor running through her hand. Cameron turned to me as if my daughter had already ceased to be part of the conversation. The ceremony starts soon. The car can take her back to the hotel, and you can come upstairs. You expect me to leave her? I expect you to remember whose day this is. She is your niece. Only real family members are allowed. The words seemed to silence everything around me. The quartet was still playing inside, and car doors were still closing behind us, but the sounds reached me as if they were coming through water. I saw Cameron at 16, sitting on the kitchen floor in our mother's robe. I remembered her asking whether our father had left because she was too difficult to love. I remembered promising that she would never have to earn her place with me. I had never asked her to stop loving our mother. I had never required her to reject our father before I signed the guardianship papers. I had never told her that my sacrifices gave me ownership of every feeling she would have afterward. I smiled because anger would have given Cameron a scene she could use against Ruby. Have you forgotten? I asked. Her eyes narrowed. She knew I was not asking whether she remembered one particular event. I was asking whether she remembered the terror of being left outside a family someone else had chosen. Do not do this here, she said. Do not turn my wedding into another speech about everything you paid for and everything you gave up. I was not talking about money. Cameron's expression hardened because she understood that answer too. I gave the earrings to the coordinator. Then I placed the speech folder on top of them. Hannah, Cameron said, lowering her voice. If you walk away now, do not blame me for what happens between us. I looked at Ruby, who was trying not to cry in front of the guard. No, I said. Whatever happens next belongs to the person who created this choice. I took my daughter back to the parking lot. Ruby began apologizing before I had even closed her door. Mom, I am sorry. If I had not changed Phoebe's speech, you could still be inside with Cameron. I sat behind the steering wheel, but did not start the car. The dashboard clock read 10:17. You did not remove your name from that list. But she only did it because of me. She did it because you refused to help her frighten another child into silence. Ruby wiped her face with her sleeve. You raised her. She is almost like your daughter. The words opened the guilt Cameron had relied on for 18 years. I had taught Ruby to be considerate, but somewhere along the way, she had also learned that keeping peace meant absorbing pain quietly. She had watched me excuse Cameron so often that she believed a child should accept humiliation rather than force me to choose. I took out my phone. Are you calling Aunt Cameron? Ruby asked. No, I opened Jonathan's contact and typed one sentence. Before you marry my sister, ask Phoebe why Ruby was removed from the guest list. I read it twice. I did not tell him what Phoebe had said. I did not accuse Cameron of anything. I did not ask him to cancel the ceremony. I only told a father to ask his daughter a question. I sent the message at 10:18. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Ruby sat with both hands folded in her lap, while guests continued walking past our parked car. At 10:29, the quartet stopped playing. At 10:35, two members of the wedding party hurried from the glass house toward the side building where the family rooms were located. My phone remained silent. At 10:42, the coordinator came outside, carrying the earrings and speech folder I had given her. She spoke briefly with the venue manager, then returned inside without looking toward our car. Ruby whispered, "Did I ruin it? You told Phoebe she was allowed to tell the truth. Everything after that is an adult decision." I wanted the sentence to sound certain for her sake. Inside, I was still fighting the old instinct to run back and fix whatever Cameron had broken. At 10:48, exactly 30 minutes after I sent the message, my phone rang. Cameron's name filled the screen. I answered without putting it on speaker. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed. Her voice cracked beneath the anger. "Jonathan took Phoebe and left. He canceled everything." Ruby turned toward the window, but I saw her shoulders fold inward. "I told him to ask his daughter one question," I said. "Whatever ended your wedding came from your answer. You had no right to interfere. You removed my child from your wedding because she helped another child speak. She is 13. She does not understand what families need. She understood that Phoebe was afraid." Cameron's breathing became ragged. Behind her, I could hear doors opening, people asking questions, and someone telling her the guests had to be informed that the ceremony would not begin. Then her voice dropped. "You chose someone else again," she whispered. "You always do." The accusation did not sound like it belonged to that morning. It sounded old, worn smooth by years of use inside her mind. Before I could ask who she believed I had chosen before, Cameron ended the call. A message from Jonathan arrived less than a minute later. "Thank you for telling me to ask. Phoebe is safe. There will be no wedding today." I read the sentence twice and stopped on the word ask. Cameron had not been most afraid that someone would oppose her. She had been afraid that Phoebe would be given the right to answer. By 7 the next morning, I had 38 unread messages. Some came from relatives I had not heard from in years. Others came from Cameron's coworkers, women from the bridal party, and guests whose names I barely recognized. The wording changed, but the story underneath remained the same. I had grown jealous of Cameron's happiness. Ruby had interfered with Phoebe because she wanted attention. I had used a childish disagreement to turn Jonathan against his bride. One message claimed I had threatened to withdraw financial support, even though I had never been responsible for the wedding contracts. Cameron had found the version that protected her. I saved screenshots but did not answer. A public argument would have forced Ruby to watch adults debate whether she deserved to be humiliated. My daughter had already spent the night asking questions no 13-year-old should have needed to ask. She came into the kitchen wearing the same sweatshirt she had slept in and sat across from me without touching her cereal. If I apologized to Aunt Cameron, could Jonathan still marry her? I closed my phone and placed it face down on the table. "Why do you think your apology would change his decision?" "Because I helped Phoebe change the script. If I had stayed out of it, none of this would have happened." The wedding did not stop because you moved words around in a document. It stopped because Jonathan asked his daughter what those words were doing to her. Ruby pushed one cereal piece through the milk with her spoon. "But if I tell Cameron I was wrong, maybe she can explain everything." A child's apology cannot repair an adult's choice. Jonathan decided what he believed was safe for Phoebe. Cameron decided how she would respond when he questioned her. Those decisions belonged to them. Ruby looked toward the hallway, where her pale blue dress still hung over the back of a chair. "She said I was not real family." "I know. You raised her like she was your daughter. The ache behind my ribs returned. That does not give her permission to hurt mine. Ruby finally lifted the spoon, though she did not eat. Are you sorry you chose me? I reached across the table and covered her hand. There was never a choice between you and Cameron. She created one because she wanted to know whether I would leave you outside for her. I am sorry she put you there. I am not sorry I took you home. My phone rang before Ruby could answer. Jonathan's name appeared on the screen. I stepped into the living room but left the door open, so Ruby would know I was not hiding anything from her. Jonathan sounded as though he had not slept. He told me he and Phoebe were staying with his sister for a few days, while Cameron made arrangements to leave the house. Phoebe is all right, he said. Shaken, but she is with people she trusts. What happened after my message? He was quiet for a moment, choosing what he could tell me without turning his daughter's pain into another family story. He had found Phoebe in the small room beside the bridal suite. Cameron had told everyone she needed time alone because she was nervous about the video. When Jonathan asked why Ruby had been removed from the guest list, Phoebe first said she did not want to ruin his wedding. That answer frightened him more than any accusation could have. He asked to see the script. Phoebe showed him the printed version Cameron had written and the version she and Ruby had edited. Jonathan read both before asking which one Phoebe wanted to say. She pointed to the version she wrote with Ruby, he told me. Then she said Cameron warned her that I might cancel the wedding if I thought she was not ready for a new family. Jonathan asked whether Cameron had told her to keep the disagreement secret. Phoebe admitted Cameron said he had already lost enough and should not be burdened with another problem. I should have noticed, Jonathan said. Every time Phoebe tried to tell me she was uncomfortable, I called it normal adjustment. I wanted the wedding to mean we were moving forward, so I let Cameron define what moving forward looked like. He brought the 2 documents to Cameron and told her the ceremony had to be postponed until they understood what had happened. Cameron blamed Ruby immediately. She said my daughter had filled Phoebe's head with grief, resentment, and ideas she was too young to understand. Jonathan asked one question. Why did Phoebe have to call the years with her mother incomplete? Cameron said the video was symbolic. She said Laura would always matter, but a new marriage could not survive if everyone kept treating a dead woman's memory as sacred. Jonathan told her Phoebe was not asking him to remain frozen in grief. She was asking not to have her childhood rewritten in front of 200 people. That was when Cameron lost control. I cannot marry you while a woman who has been dead for 4 years still decides how everyone in this house is allowed to feel, she said. I will not spend the rest of my life competing with Laura. Jonathan understood then that the argument had never been about a wedding video. Cameron did not merely want a place in their future. She wanted authority over their past. He canceled the ceremony before the guests were seated. He did not make an announcement himself. The venue manager informed everyone that the wedding would not proceed due to a private family matter. Jonathan took Phoebe to his sister's house. He told Cameron that the engagement was over and that she needed to arrange another place to live. Cameron's name was not on the deed, but she had lived there long enough that Jonathan knew he could not simply change the locks. His attorney had already helped him prepare written notice, giving her a reasonable period to remove her belongings. Until then, he and Phoebe would remain elsewhere. I am sorry this reached Ruby, he said, and thank you for telling me to ask. You do not owe me thanks. I do, but not because you ended anything. You did what every adult around Phoebe should have done. You made sure her father listened. He did not promise to expose Cameron or defend me to the guests. His responsibility was to his daughter, and I respected him more for keeping it there. A few minutes after the call ended, Ruby received a voice note from Phoebe. Her voice was small and tired. Thank you for saying I did not have to call my mom a mistake. Dad says we were already a family. He says nobody gets to take that away. Ruby listened twice. On the second time, she cried quietly, but the guilt in her face had begun to loosen. Cameron's messages continued through the afternoon. Jonathan had panicked. Phoebe was confused. Ruby had encouraged disobedience. I had turned 2 emotional children into judges of an adult relationship. Then Cameron sent a message that made me stop. You know what Ruby is like when she feels abandoned. You should have understood why Phoebe needed a clean beginning. She had taken the pain of 2 children and rearranged it until she became the injured person. I still did not answer. Around 4, Miles called. For the past 6 months, he had been trying to rebuild the Sunday phone calls he had neglected and follow through on part of his parenting schedule. I had not mistaken effort for repair, but Ruby had begun answering him without checking my face first. His name on my screen made me think something had happened to her school account or an upcoming visit. Instead, he said, "Did Cameron's wedding get canceled?" "Yes. She messaged me this morning." My hand tightened around the phone. "Why?" "She wants me to tell Jonathan that you always destroy relationships and then make yourself look like the victim." I sat down at the kitchen table. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing." Miles exhaled slowly. "She sent 3 messages, then called twice. She said I owed her because she protected me when our marriage was ending." The room seemed to narrow around me. "Protected you from what?" He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost every trace of defensiveness. "Cameron asked me to lie for her again. Before I answer, you need to know what she helped me hide 8 years ago." The word again stayed with me after everything else disappeared. Whatever that call was about, it had not begun at the wedding. Miles chose a coffee shop beside the interstate, halfway between Maplebrook and the city where he lived. We had never taken Ruby there, never celebrated an anniversary there, and never argued in its parking lot. It was a place without a family memory attached to it, which made it easier to sit across from the man who had once been my husband. Ruby was at school. I had not told her why I was meeting her father, only that he and I needed to discuss something from the past. Whatever Miles revealed, I wanted time to understand it before deciding what belonged in our daughter's life. He was already seated when I arrived. A paper cup sat untouched between his hands. He looked older than he had during our last custody review, though perhaps guilt simply made me notice the gray around his temples. Before I sat down, he said, "Nothing Cameron did makes me innocent." I pulled out the chair. "I cheated on you," he continued. "I lied because telling the truth would have cost me the life I was trying to keep and the life I was trying to start. I let you question yourself because it was easier than admitting what I had done." I had imagined apologies from Miles for years. None of them brought the relief I once thought they would. "Then tell me why Cameron believes you owe her." He opened an old laptop and placed it between us. "In 2016, Cameron invited me to a bellwether fundraising event. You were covering late shifts because your department had lost 2 employees. Ruby had just started preschool, and we had been arguing about money, schedules, and how little time we had left for each other. I remember. I met Celeste there." The name still caused a physical reaction, a tightening beneath my ribs that arrived before thought. Celeste had been a donor relations consultant who traveled frequently and lived in another county. For months, Miles had insisted they met by chance through work. "Cameron introduced you?" He nodded. "She told Celeste you and I were technically still married but already living separate lives." "We were not separated." "I know." The affair did not begin that evening. Miles was careful to make that distinction, though it offered him no protection. He and Celeste exchanged messages afterward. They met for coffee, then dinner, then at a hotel after he told me he was attending a regional sales meeting. Cameron discovered the relationship within weeks. "She did not confront me," he said. "She asked whether I was finally going to admit that the marriage was over." "What did you say?" "That I did not know what I wanted." "And she helped you hide it while you decided." Miles looked down. "Yes." Cameron provided excuses that sounded ordinary, because she was part of my daily life. She invited him to foundation events that did not exist, told me she had asked him to help move donated furniture, and warned him whenever I mentioned that his schedule no longer made sense. "She knew when you were getting suspicious," he said, "sometimes before you asked me anything." I remembered calling Cameron from the clinic parking lot because Miles had missed dinner again. She had told me not to become the kind of wife who tracked every hour of her husband's day. I had apologized to Miles that night for distrusting him. What did she tell you about me? Miles rubbed both palms across the paper cup. That you had chosen Ruby and work. That you did not need a husband anymore, only someone to cover the bills and show up in family pictures. My anger was not sudden. It moved through me slowly, touching old conversations and changing their meaning. While Cameron told Miles I no longer needed him, she told me Miles wanted a life without responsibility. Whenever I said counseling seemed to help, she warned that continuing only made me look desperate. She said I was teaching Ruby that a woman should beg a man to stay. Some of that had sounded protective at the time. Why are the messages still there? I asked. My old personal account synchronized automatically to a cloud backup. I stopped using it after the divorce. I did not save these as evidence. I was too ashamed to open the account, and too much of a coward to go through it and delete everything. He turned the laptop toward me. There was no single confession. No message said Cameron intended to destroy my marriage. The truth was spread across dozens of small permissions. Stay away tonight. She needs to understand what life without you feels like. Hannah is asking questions. Do not use the Hartford meeting again. She has Ruby in the clinic. She will be fine. When this is over, she will need me again. The last sentence made me lean back. Miles did not touch me. At least he had learned that regret did not give him the right to offer comfort. He opened another folder. This is the screenshot she sent me during the week we almost went back to counseling. I remembered that week. Miles had slept in the guest room for months, but after 3 sessions we had discussed trying again. I told Cameron I could not continue living in uncertainty. If Miles and I were going to stay married, we had to return to counseling and tell the truth. The message I sent her had read, I cannot keep doing this unless we return to counseling. The screenshot Cameron forwarded to Miles contained only the first 6 words. I cannot keep doing this. Beneath it, Cameron had written, She has made her decision. Stop forcing her to say it twice. You could have asked me, I said. I should have. You still had my phone number. We still shared a house. We had a counselor. I know. But you accepted the version that gave you permission to keep seeing Celeste. Yes. He did not call himself manipulated. He did not ask me to distribute the blame more generously. Cameron had handed him a convenient lie, and he had chosen it because the truth would have required courage. I scrolled farther through the account. Several details returned with painful clarity. Cameron had known the name of the hotel where Miles stayed before I told anyone. She had once arrived at my house with groceries, the morning after he failed to come home, though I had not called her. When I asked how she knew something was wrong, she said sisters could feel those things. I had believed her. Why tell me now? I asked. Because yesterday she asked me to repeat the same story. She wanted me to tell Jonathan that you destroy relationships when people stop choosing you. A bitter laugh escaped me. She said that about me? She said Jonathan needed to know you had done this before. Miles closed his eyes briefly. I realized she was asking me to use our worst lie to protect a new one. He apologized without asking for forgiveness. He said he would give me access to the account and a copy of the archived messages. He also agreed that if I ever decided Ruby should know any part of this, we would tell her in language that did not make her responsible for our marriage. Ruby may ask whether Cameron did it because of her, I said. Then I will tell her the truth. I betrayed you because I chose to. Cameron made it easier, but I was the adult who broke my vows. It was the first responsible thing Miles had said about our marriage, without being pushed toward it. That did not repair anything. It only placed one piece of the wreckage where it belonged. Before leaving, I opened the final email in the chain. Cameron had sent it to Miles during the week we nearly returned to counseling. You and Ruby get all of her. I get whatever is left. I read the sentence again, remembering all the times Cameron had said she was protecting me from a husband who did not deserve me. She had not wanted me free. She had wanted me returned. That night, After Ruby went to bed, I opened the archive Miles had shared with me and placed my own phone beside the laptop. I was not looking for another secret. I already knew enough to understand what Cameron had done. I wanted to see how many times the truth had passed directly in front of me wearing a name I had chosen not to question. Stress, grief, fear of abandonment, sisterly concern. For years, I had used those words to translate Cameron's behavior into something easier to forgive. The emails gave me dates. My old messages supplied everything around them. On my 7th wedding anniversary, Miles and I had reservations at a small restaurant in Boston. 2 hours before we were supposed to leave, Cameron called from a pharmacy parking lot and said she could not breathe. I canceled dinner, drove 40 minutes to find her, and sat beside her until midnight. By then, she was calm enough to ask whether Miles had been angry that I chose her. I had told her he understood. The truth was that he had stopped waiting and eaten alone. On Ruby's first day of kindergarten, Cameron arrived at our house crying because her landlord had raised the rent. Instead of taking Ruby for the breakfast I had promised, I spent the morning reviewing Cameron's lease and transferring enough money to cover the increase. Ruby had stood in the hallway wearing a new backpack while I told her we would celebrate after school. I never noticed how often Cameron's emergencies arrived on days that did not belong to her. There had been a weekend when Miles and I planned to leave Ruby with his mother and drive to the coast. Cameron called the night before because a coworker had criticized her during a meeting. She said she could not face being alone. I invited her to stay at our house and canceled the trip. At the time, each crisis had seemed separate. Together, they formed a pattern. Whenever my life began to pull me towards someone else, Cameron created a reason for me to turn back. I opened a message from the week after Ruby was born. Cameron had come to the hospital with balloons and held her niece for almost an hour. She smiled in every photograph. That evening, after Miles took Ruby to the nursery so I could sleep, Cameron sat beside my bed and whispered, "I do not know where I fit in your life anymore." I had been exhausted, sore, and overwhelmed by the fear that I would fail my own child. Still, I reached for Cameron. "You will always have a place," I told her. She began crying, and I apologized. I had apologized to my adult sister because my daughter had been born. Once I saw that moment clearly, others followed. Every time Cameron felt displaced, I responded by giving her more. More time, more money, more explanations, more proof that she still mattered. The time had not appeared from nowhere. I had taken it from my marriage, from Ruby, and from myself. Near midnight, Ruby came into the living room, carrying a glass of water. She stopped when she saw the laptop. "Is that about Aunt Cameron?" I closed the screen halfway. "Some of it." "Did Dad tell you something bad?" I asked her to sit beside me. There was no version of the truth that would remain completely outside Ruby's life. Cameron had already pulled her into the conflict, and Miles had been part of our daughter's history from the beginning. But Ruby did not need every email, hotel name, or lie. "Your aunt had a hard time when my life began including people she could not control," I said. "She was afraid there would not be enough love left for her." Ruby stared into her water. "Because of Dad?" "Because of Dad, my work, and later, because of you. But being afraid does not excuse what she did. Adults are responsible for how they handle their fear." "Did she help Dad leave?" "Your father chose to cheat and lie. Cameron knew and helped him hide some things. She also told each of us different versions of what the other person wanted." Ruby's face tightened. "Was it because I was born?" "No." She looked up. I made sure she could see there was no hesitation in me. "You did not cause any adult's choice. You were a child. Your father was responsible for being faithful. Cameron was responsible for telling the truth. I was responsible for protecting you. None of that belonged to you. But she thought you chose me. I was supposed to choose you. I am your mother." Ruby leaned against the couch. "Does she hate me?" "I do not know whether Cameron would call it hate. I know she treated you as if your place in my life took something from her. That was wrong." My phone rang before Ruby could ask another question. Jonathan apologized for calling late. He said Phoebe was asleep at his sister's house and had finally eaten a full meal. Then he told me something Cameron had said during their relationship. She talked about Ruby more than I realized, he said. She said you stopped knowing how to put family first after becoming a mother. I almost laughed at the contradiction. Ruby is my family. That is what I thought she meant. I assumed Cameron was complaining about normal distance between adult sisters. She made it sound as though Ruby had become an excuse for you to avoid her. Jonathan had never heard Cameron say she hated my daughter. He had heard something more socially acceptable, that motherhood had changed me, that I had become unavailable, that I no longer understood loyalty. The same accusation had been following me for 13 years. The next afternoon, Cameron called. Jonathan's attorney had delivered written notice, requiring her to remove her belongings within the permitted period. Cameron spoke as though the notice itself proved he was cruel. He expects me to find an apartment while I am dealing with canceled vendors, and everyone asking what happened. You have time to arrange somewhere. Nothing near Bellwether is remotely comparable to Jonathan's house. The only places available either have no parking, terrible kitchens, or a commute that will destroy my entire day. Cameron earned enough to rent a modest apartment. What she could not afford was the same space, neighborhood, and comfort Jonathan had provided, without reducing the lifestyle she wanted to display. I opened my mouth to say she could stay with us. The offer had formed before I consciously decided anything. It was the old route through every Cameron crisis. She lost something, I created space. She overspent, I covered the difference. She made a choice. I softened the consequence. Ruby was doing homework at the dining table. She could not hear Cameron's words, but she recognized the tone of the call. Without interrupting me, she gathered her textbooks, laptop charger, and pencils. Then she carried them toward her bedroom. "What are you doing?" I asked. Ruby stopped. "If Aunt Cameron comes here, she will probably need the table during the day." She had not protested. She had not reminded me what Cameron had done. She had simply begun making herself smaller before I had even issued the invitation. That hurt more than an argument would have. I returned to the call. "You cannot stay here." Cameron went silent. "What?" "I can send you listings for short-term rentals. I can give you the number of the moving service the clinic uses. I am not paying for either one, and you are not moving into my house." "You are seriously leaving me without a home?" "You have an income, notice, and options. You do not have the house you wanted. That is not the same as having nowhere to go." Her voice sharpened. "This is revenge." "No. Revenge would be trying to make you lose more. I am refusing to replace what your actions cost you. You have been cold ever since Ruby was born." There it was again. Not since the wedding. Not since I discovered the emails. Since Ruby was born. I looked toward my daughter, still standing in the hallway with her books pressed against her chest. "You are going to answer me about what happened with Miles," I said. "You are also going to answer for removing Ruby and pressuring Phoebe. I already told you, those girls misunderstood." "Then meet me and explain it once, without them present." Ruby will not sit through another adult telling her that her pain was a misunderstanding. Cameron began bargaining immediately. She wanted me to speak to Jonathan first, to tell him she had been under pressure and that the wedding video had been taken out of context. "I will not contact Jonathan for you. He listens to you now. He listened to Phoebe. You started it. I told him to ask his daughter a question. I am asking you questions now." Cameron finally agreed to meet the following evening at the 24-hour diner near the hotel where I used to work nights. After the call ended, Ruby slowly returned her books to the table. "You said no," she said. "I should have said it before you started packing." My phone vibrated with a message from Cameron. "I will tell you what happened, but you owe me the chance to fix Jonathan first." I read it once and turned the screen face down. Even now, Cameron believed the truth was something she could sell back to me in exchange for being rescued. The diner had not changed much since the years when I worked mornings at the clinic and nights behind the front desk of the Maplebrook Inn. The vinyl booths were still cracked at the corners. The coffee still arrived before anyone asked for it, and the fluorescent lights made midnight feel no different from noon. When Cameron was 16, she sometimes waited for me in the corner booth because she was too frightened to stay alone in our apartment. I would find her asleep against the window with a textbook open in her lap. I always bought her pancakes before taking her home, even when I had only enough money left for gas. Cameron was sitting in that same booth when I arrived. She wore a dark wool coat and had arranged her hair as carefully as she had on the morning of the wedding. A cream folder lay in front of her beside a cup of coffee she had not touched. "I wrote something," she said before I sat down. "It explains what actually happened." She slid a printed statement across the table. The first paragraph said Ruby had misunderstood a private family matter. The second described Phoebe as emotionally overwhelmed by grief and unable to separate memories of her mother from anxiety about the wedding. The final paragraph called Ruby's removal from the guest list a temporary security decision made to prevent further distress. At the bottom, Cameron had left a blank space for my name. "You want me to send this to Jonathan? He respects you now." Her mouth tightened around the word now. "If you explain that everyone overreacted, he may agree to talk to me." I placed the pages back inside the folder without reading them aloud. "You said you would tell me what happened." "I just did." "No, you gave me another script." Cameron folded her hands on the table. "What do you want from me, Hannah?" "I want 3 answers." Her gaze moved toward the waitress, pouring coffee at the counter, as if she were already looking for a witness to how unreasonable I had become. "Why did you remove only Ruby from the wedding?" "Because she interfered in a family that was not hers. Phoebe was her friend. She was a child who had known Phoebe for a few months. She had no right to undermine the woman who was about to become part of that household. You did not remove me because you still expected me to fasten your dress and read your speech. That had nothing to do with it. You wanted me inside without my daughter." Cameron leaned back. "I expected you to understand that one difficult morning should not destroy years between sisters." I let the answer sit between us before asking the second question. "Why did Phoebe have to erase her mother?" "She was not erasing Laura. You wrote that before you arrived, Jonathan and Phoebe were only surviving. You wrote that they would become a real family on your wedding day. They were trapped in grief. Jonathan wanted to move forward, but every room in that house still belonged to a dead woman. Phoebe did not ask you to leave. She asked to keep the truth of her childhood." Cameron's voice sharpened. "Children do not always know what is healthy for them. Sometimes an adult has to help them let go." "You were not helping her let go. You were telling her which parts of her life were allowed to count." Cameron looked toward the window. Cars passed through the wet parking lot, their headlights sliding across her face. I asked the third question. "Why did you help Miles lie to me?" Her expression changed, but only slightly. "Miles was already gone. He was living in my house. He had left the marriage emotionally. He told you that because it made what he was doing easier. You were miserable. So you introduced him to Celeste, covered his absences, and sent him part of a message to make him think I had ended counseling. I did not make him cheat. I know. Miles made that choice." Cameron looked almost relieved until I continued. "You made sure the truth reached neither of us in time to force an honest decision." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "He did not deserve you. He had already decided what kind of man he was. You always say someone else decided first, then you only help the result happen. That is not fair. You said Ruby chose Phoebe over you. You said Phoebe chose grief over a future. You said Miles had already left in his heart. Every time you wanted someone removed, you decided they had removed themselves." Cameron's fingers tightened around the cup. "I knew about the affair," she said. "Yes, I knew before you did. I thought when it ended, you would finally stop exhausting yourself trying to save a man who did not deserve you. When it ended, I was left raising Ruby while grieving a marriage I did not understand. And I was there." The answer came too quickly. Cameron realized it, but she could not take it back. You were there, I repeated. I helped you. You needed me to need you. Her eyes filled. You had Miles. Then you had Ruby. Every year there was less of you left. Is that why you hate my daughter? I do not hate Ruby. You had her photographed so a security guard could keep her outside. Because she humiliated me. She told another child she was allowed to remember her mother. Cameron shook her head. You make Ruby sound innocent in everything. You have always done that. She was an infant when you first decided she had taken something from you. Cameron's face crumpled, but the anger beneath it remained. Before Ruby, I was the person you came home for. The old diner seemed to close around us. I remembered her waiting in that booth at 16, watching the door until I arrived. I had believed I was teaching her that I would always return. Instead, she had learned that fear could summon me. You were supposed to choose me once, Cameron said. Just once, without making me share you with someone else. I chose you thousands of times, not when it mattered. I left school for you. I worked 3 jobs for you. I paid the parts of tuition your aide did not cover. I canceled anniversaries, trips, and mornings with my child because you needed me. I never asked you to keep score. I am not keeping score. I am finally naming the pattern. Cameron wiped her face with the heel of her hand. You did not want to be chosen, I said. You wanted everyone else removed so there would be no choice left. You promised you would never leave me. I made that promise to a grieving 16-year-old who was terrified of being alone. It did not give the woman you became permission to damage my marriage, punish my daughter, or frighten another child. Cameron stared at the statement between us. What happens now? You do not contact Ruby directly. You do not call, text, send gifts, or ask other relatives to speak for you. She is my niece. She is my daughter. Cameron flinched. I will not call Jonathan. I will not ask him to reconsider. You cannot live with us, and I will not pay for your apartment, moving expenses, canceled vendors, or any other cost created by your choices. I already lost the house and the wedding. Jonathan ended the engagement. He has also made it clear that you will not have private contact with Phoebe. Those are his boundaries. Mine concern Ruby and me. What about the contracts? You and Jonathan signed them. The vendors will divide the cancellation charges according to those agreements. You will pay the part assigned to you. Cameron looked stunned, as if contracts had always been things that became someone else's problem once they hurt. You are abandoning me when I have nothing. You have a job, an income, written notice, and time to find housing. You do not have the life you expected. That is not the same as having nothing. She pushed the folder toward me again. Send this one statement. Help me correct what everyone thinks, and then I will find a therapist. No. Her lips parted. If you begin therapy, it must be because you intend to tell the truth, not because you expect treatment to become another receipt you can exchange for access to us. Any future contact begins with you naming what you did without blaming Ruby, Phoebe, Jonathan, Miles, or me. And then you forgive me? I am not promising that. Cameron stood so suddenly the table shook. Then what am I to you? I looked at the woman I had raised, and finally stopped searching her face for the child I once protected. My sister, and an adult responsible for what you did. She waited for me to soften it. I did not. Cameron took her coat and walked out of the diner. The bell above the door rang once. Through the window, I watched her cross the parking lot without turning around. Every memory in that place told me to follow her, to make sure she had gas, to ask where she would sleep, to stop her from feeling abandoned before she could use that feeling to hurt herself or someone else. I remained in the booth. A few minutes later, the waitress approached and looked at the untouched coffee across from me. Will the other lady be ordering anything? I did not look for meaning in the seat Cameron had left. I only opened my wallet. No, just the check for what I ordered. 2 weeks after the wedding, Jonathan asked whether Ruby and Phoebe could meet at the Maplebrook Public Library. He chose a small study room with glass walls near the children's section. The girls could talk privately at one end of the table, while Jonathan and I remained close enough to step in, if either of them became overwhelmed. It was not a reunion, arranged to make the adults feel better. Jonathan said Phoebe needed to see Ruby without secrecy, scripts, or anyone telling her what the conversation was supposed to mean. Ruby carried a paperback she had already read twice, because she did not know what else to bring. Phoebe arrived holding the cream envelope that had once contained Cameron's wedding speech. For the first several minutes, neither girl opened it. Phoebe traced one corner of the envelope with her thumbnail. "I thought you would be mad at me." Ruby looked confused. "Why?" "Because I did not tell my dad before the wedding. If I had shown him the script earlier, you would not have been stopped at the door." Ruby lowered her eyes. "I thought you would be mad at me because I helped change it. If I had left it alone, your dad and Cameron might still be married." Jonathan and I exchanged a look. We had discussed what we needed to say, but neither of us had expected the girls to arrive carrying opposite halves of the same guilt. Jonathan moved his chair closer to Phoebe. "I need you both to hear this clearly. I canceled the wedding." Phoebe looked at him. "Because of the video. Because I learned you were being told to hide something from me. The video helped me understand what was happening, but the decision was mine." I turned toward Ruby. "You did not write Cameron's original speech. You did not remove your name from the guest list, and you did not decide how she responded when Jonathan questioned her." Ruby pressed the edge of her book against the table. "But I sent Phoebe the new version. You helped a friend find words she could live with," I said. "That did not force any adult to lie, threaten, or leave." Phoebe opened the envelope and removed the pages. The original speech was still covered with Cameron's neat markings. Beside it was the version she and Ruby had written together. "I kept thinking I should have just read the first one," she said. "It was only a few minutes. Then everyone could have had the wedding." Jonathan's face tightened. "You should never have to call your life with your mother broken, so adults can have a comfortable ceremony." Phoebe looked down at Laura's name on the revised page. Ruby leaned toward her. "You do not have to pretend your mom did not count." Phoebe gave a small nod. "And you did not ruin anything by coming with your mom." The sentences were simple, but both girls seemed to breathe differently afterward. They spent the next half hour talking about school, music, and whether the library cafe made decent hot chocolate. Jonathan and I did not turn their friendship into proof that everything was healed. They were still children who had been placed in an adult conflict, and feeling better for one afternoon did not erase what had happened. Before we left, Phoebe tore the original speech in half. She did not make a performance of it. She placed the pieces inside the envelope and handed it to her father. "I do not want this in my room anymore." Jonathan took it without telling her what the gesture meant. That afternoon, Miles met Ruby at a bakery near our house. I sat at a nearby table, close enough for Ruby to look toward me if she needed to, but the apology belonged to him. Miles did not begin by promising that everything would be different. "I missed calls, weekends, and things I said I would attend," he told her. "I made you wonder whether I would show up, and that was my fault." Ruby kept both hands around her cup. "Mom said Aunt Cameron helped you lie." "She did. But she did not make me betray your mother. I chose the easiest and most cowardly thing because the truth would have forced me to face what I was doing." "Was I the reason you wanted to leave?" "No." His answer came without delay. "You were never responsible for our marriage. You were a child then, and you are still not responsible for fixing what I broke." Ruby studied his face. "Are you going to start calling every day now?" Miles shook his head. "I do not want to make a big promise so I can feel like a better father for 5 minutes. I want to start with Sundays and the 2 visits already on the calendar. Then you can decide whether my actions are becoming reliable." Ruby looked at me before answering. I did not nod or tell her what to say. "Okay," she said. "But I am not packing until you are actually on the way." That is fair. It was not forgiveness. It was a boundary Miles had finally agreed not to treat as punishment. When we returned home, a message from Cameron was waiting on my phone. "I started therapy today. I told her about Ruby, Phoebe, Miles, and the wedding without saying they made me do anything. I know one appointment does not change what I did. There was no request for money, housing, or access to Ruby. She did not ask me to praise her for attending one session. I read the message twice and left it unanswered. My silence was not revenge. Cameron had spent years expecting my reaction before I had time to understand my own feelings. For once, I allowed myself to think without managing what my answer might do to her. Ruby had gone to her room to finish homework. I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept old tax records, school forms, and the nursing program information sheet I had carried from one apartment to another for 18 years. The paper had softened along every fold. I called the community college before I could invent another reason to wait. The woman in the registrar's office found my name in the archived system. She explained that some general education credits might still transfer, but the nursing program required recent science coursework. My anatomy and physiology credits were more than 10 years old, so I would need to take the first course again before applying. For a moment, the requirement felt like proof that I had waited too long. Then she told me about an 8-week late start class, beginning in April 2027. It met 2 evenings a week, and the laboratory section began after my regular clinic shift. "I can request your old transcript today," she said. "Once it is reviewed, we can confirm whether you are eligible to register." I looked at the work calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. My first instinct was to list everyone who might need me during those hours. Cameron might call, Ruby might need help, the clinic might be short-staffed, Miles might fail to arrive. Then I remembered Ruby carrying her books away from the dining table, because she assumed Cameron would need more space. "I would like to request the transcript," I said. Ruby came into the kitchen while I was giving the registrar my email address. She waited until I ended the call. "Are you going back to school?" "I am trying to take one class." She did not ask who would take care of Cameron if something happened. She did not ask whether the family could manage without me for 2 evenings a week. "What kind of notebook do you want?" she asked. I laughed softly. "I have not thought that far ahead. You need one with sections. And pockets. Probably graph paper too. We are not buying half the store for one class." Ruby smiled. "You say that now." The transcript confirmation arrived the next morning. By Friday, the college emailed that I was eligible to register for Anatomy and Physiology 1 when enrollment opened. I placed my work schedule, Ruby's school calendar, and the class hours beside one another on the kitchen table. Nothing fit perfectly. I would need to adjust one clinic shift, prepare dinners ahead, and ask for help when I needed it. For most of my adult life, every plan had begun with the same question: who might need me? This time, I allowed a different question to remain on the page. Who did I still want to become? 6 months after Cameron's wedding was canceled, I sat in my car outside Maplebrook Community College with an anatomy textbook on the passenger seat and my hands around the steering wheel. The April evening was cold enough to fog the edges of the windshield. Students crossed the parking lot carrying backpacks and coffee, with the ease of people who had not spent 18 years wondering whether they had missed their chance. My class began in 12 minutes. I had worked a full shift at the health center, eaten half a sandwich at my desk, and changed from my clinic shoes into sneakers in the parking lot. The late start course met twice a week for 8 weeks, with a laboratory session that ran until nearly 10. I knew every inconvenience before the first class began. Knowing them did not make them easier. My supervisor had approved one adjusted shift each week, but I still had to arrive early on another day to cover the hours. I cooked dinners on Sundays, kept frozen meals labeled by date, and arranged for Ruby to spend class evenings with a neighbor she already trusted or at the library study program. Miles was responsible for 2 of those evenings during the course, but I had made backup plans because progress was not the same as reliability. Ruby helped me check the calendar. She did not become the person responsible for holding our life together. That distinction mattered to me. My phone lit up with a message from her. "You are still in the parking lot, aren't you?" I smiled and typed that I was going inside. 3 dots appeared immediately. Take the blue notebook. The yellow one is for lab. I reached for the blue notebook and finally opened the car door. The class was harder than I remembered. The instructor spoke quickly, using words that once would have felt familiar, but now seemed to belong to a language I had abandoned. By the end of the first hour, my hand ached from taking notes, and I had already written one term in the wrong section. During the break, 2 younger students compared prerequisite courses, while I stood beside a vending machine searching my phone for the meaning of a word I had just copied. For several minutes, I felt 24 again, but this time no one needed me to leave. I was simply scared that wanting something did not mean I could still do it. Then the instructor began the laboratory orientation and placed a model heart on the table. I remembered why I had once chosen nursing, not because I wanted to rescue everyone, but because I had been curious about how the body carried pain, adapted to injury, and continued working after something had changed it. I stayed until the end. Life outside the classroom had not become simple during those 6 months. Jonathan and Phoebe remained at his house after Cameron moved into a smaller apartment across town. He and Phoebe attended counseling together, not to finish grieving Laura, but to rebuild the trust that had been damaged when Phoebe believed she had to protect him from the truth. Jonathan told me Phoebe had placed Laura's photographs back in the rooms where she wanted them. Some weeks she spoke about her mother often, other weeks she did not. No one treated either choice as a sign that she was moving backward. Ruby and Phoebe remained friends. They exchanged music, complained about homework, and met at the library when their schedules allowed. No one posted their story online or turned their honesty into a lesson for strangers. They were allowed to be 2 girls whose friendship had survived an adult conflict. Miles kept most of the small promises he had made. He called on Sundays, arrived for the visits on the calendar, and sent a message before leaving home so Ruby would know when to pack. He missed one call during a work trip, but instead of blaming the time difference, he apologized and asked when she wanted to reschedule. I noticed the effort. I did not rewrite the past because of it. Cameron completed her move within the written notice period and paid the cancellation charges assigned to her under the vendor contracts. She kept her job and adjusted to an apartment without the space or neighborhood she had expected. She also continued therapy. For months, our only contact consisted of brief messages that did not require an answer. She did not contact Jonathan or Phoebe, send Ruby gifts, use relatives as messengers, or create emergencies that required proof I still cared. Then, 1 week before my class began, a thick envelope arrived with Cameron's handwriting on the front. Her apology was specific. She wrote that she had removed Ruby because Ruby challenged the story she wanted Phoebe to tell. She acknowledged that she had treated Laura's memory as competition, helped Miles conceal his affair, and expected my sacrifices to become a permanent claim on my life. She did not ask me to tell Jonathan she had changed. She did not call therapy a reason we owed her another chance. She ended by acknowledging that an apology could not choose its outcome. I read it twice and placed it in a drawer until Ruby came home. Cameron sent something for you, I told her. She wrote it with help from her therapist, but the therapist did not contact us. I read it first because that is my responsibility. Ruby looked at the envelope but did not reach for it. Do I have to read it? No. Will she know if I do not? I will tell her only that I received it, and that any decision about reading belongs to you. Ruby thought for a moment. Not yet. I returned the letter to the drawer. Not yet is enough. Our mother's final request had followed me for 18 years. Do not let Cameron face what comes next alone. I had turned those words into a command to shield my sister from every consequence. I understood now that Elaine had asked me to protect a grieving child. She had not asked me to make adulthood painless for the woman that child became. Protecting Cameron from accountability had not healed her fear. It had fed the part of her that believed love could be measured by what other people surrendered. Sometimes allowing someone to face the result of her choices was not abandonment. Sometimes it was the first honest thing left to give. After class, I drove to the 24-hour diner. Ruby was already there with our neighbor, who waved from the counter before leaving us together. My daughter had claimed the booth where Cameron and I had held our final confrontation. This time, there was no cream folder waiting to tell me what version of my life I should repeat. Ruby pushed a cup of coffee toward me. How was it? I understood about 60%. That sounds better than failing. It also sounds like a lot of studying. She opened my new notebook and checked the pages as if she were reviewing official records. Your handwriting got worse. I was under pressure. Do you think you can do it? I looked around the diner. 18 years earlier, I had sat there between shifts, counted my tips beneath the table, and used part of them to buy Cameron pancakes. Some mornings, I slept against the bus window, afraid I would miss our stop and leave her waiting. I do not know yet, I said. Ruby studied me. Were you scared to go back after all this time? Yes. Then why did you go? I turned the notebook toward me. My name appeared at the top of the registration page. Hannah Bennett. Not guardian, not emergency contact, not the person responsible for fixing whatever happened next. Just the name of a student beginning again. Because fear does not get to decide my schedule anymore. Ruby smiled and pushed the notebook fully across the table. Your turn, Mom. She opened the dessert menu while I wrote the date of my first exam on the next clean page. I used to believe family meant the people you were never allowed to leave behind. Now I knew a safe family was one where no child and no woman had to abandon herself to prove she loved someone else. Ruby debated between pie and chocolate cake, while I checked the class calendar and marked 2 study nights. We did not celebrate Cameron's smaller apartment, Jonathan's canceled wedding, or the years Miles had lost. We planned a future that was no longer being written by someone else's fear.